The courtroom fell into stunned silence as the judge delivered the final verdict that would forever change the legacy of Dave Mustaine, the once revered frontman of thrash metal pioneers. After months of contentious legal battles, the man who had risen from his tumultuous departure from Metallica to become one of heavy metal's most influential guitarists and songwriters was forced to face the consequences of his controversial actions as the gavel struck with finality. Mustaine's shoulders slumped visibly, his trademark fiery demeanor crumbling before the eyes of his supporters and critics alike. The shock of reality seemed to wash over his face, the realization that decades of building his musical empire had culminated in this moment of judgment. For nearly 40 years, Mustaine had dominated the metal scene, with Megadeth convincing millions that his approach to thrash metal was revolutionary. His intricate guitar work, technically complex compositions, and politically charged lyrics had earned him international fame and a fortune estimated in the tens of millions. The band had sold over 38 million records worldwide, received 12 Grammy nominations, and fundamentally shaped the thrash metal genre alongside Metallica, Slayer, and Anthrax. But as the music industry evolved and society's tolerance for controversial statements shifted, Maine's outspoken nature and provocative comments began to draw increasing criticism from fans, fellow musicians, and industry professionals. The case against him had been building for years, with former band members coming forward with allegations of abusive behavior under his leadership. The prosecution presented damning evidence of his public statements now reigned to through the lens of modern social standards. What had once been dismissed as the controversial opinions of a rocker were reframed as harmful rhetoric, inciting division and promoting conspiracy theories. Expert witnesses testified that his influence as a public figure made his statements not only problematic but potentially dangerous to impressionable fans who looked to him as a cultural icon. The defendant has willfully continued to use his platform to spread harmful rhetoric, despite overwhelming evidence of its negative impact, the judge stated firmly, the microphone amplifying her words throughout the hushed courtroom. This court finds that a clear message must be sent to the industry and the public about the standards we expect from those with significant cultural influence in our society. Mr. Mustaine has repeatedly hidden behind the shield of artistic expression while engaging in behavior that this court finds indefensible. The sentence was severe: permanent dissolution of Megadeth in its current form, substantial financial penalties amounting to millions in damages, and a prohibition from performing his catalog of music professionally. Again, most devastating was the court-ordered public statement Mustaine would be required to make, acknowledging that many of his past statements were now considered harmful, and apologizing for the impact they may have had his empire built over 4 decades of relentless touring, recording, and brand building was dismantled in a matter of minutes. Outside the courthouse, chaos erupted as news of the verdict spread. Devoted fans wept openly, holding vintage Megadeth albums and concert tickets, some having traveled from across the country to show support for their hero. This is the death of metal, shouted one fan wearing a vintage piece. Sells, but who's buying t-shirt? They're trying to sanitize everything that made the genre great. Free speech advocates. Decades he formed Mead largely out of spite, driven by a burned desire to prove himself and surpass his former bandmates. His rise from disgraced guitarist to thrash metal icon had been the ultimate redemption story. Music had been his salvation, his purpose, and ultimately his downfall behind the aggressive persona he presented on stage. Mustaine had faced personal demons that even his most dedicated fans only glimpsed. His struggles with addiction had nearly destroyed his career multiple times, with alcohol and drugs taking such a toll that he once lost feeling in his left arm from falling asleep with it draped over a bench after a night of heavy drinking. A severe injury to his arm in 2002 had temporarily paralyzed his left hand, leading doctors to tell him he might never play guitar again, a devastating prognosis for a man whose identity was so intertwined with his instrument. His conversion to Christianity in 2004 surprised many and seemed to offer him a new perspective. But the anger that had fueled his music never truly abated. Dave tied his entire identity to being the mastermind behind Megadeth, said a former bandmate who requested anonymity, citing fear of retaliation. The band has had over 20 different members over the years, and that's not a coincidence. He demands absolute control, and when someone challenges him, they're out. When public opinion began to turn against his statements, he couldn't adapt, because it would mean acknowledging that a fundamental part of his persona was no longer acceptable. His stubbornness ultimately destroyed him. Those who worked closely with Mustaine described a complex figure, a musical genius with an uncompromising vision, but also a man haunted by perceived betrayals and obsessed with maintaining his legacy. There are two Dave Mustaine's, explained a former producer. There's the brilliantly creative musician who can craft some of the most intricate metal compositions you've ever heard, and then there's the Dave who sees enemies everywhere and can't let go of grudges. Unfortunately, as he got older, the latter seemed to take over more and more. The case that finally ended Maine's career wasn't built on a single incident, but on a pattern of behavior that spanned years. The turning point came during the band's recent world tour, when footage from a mid-concert rant showed him making particularly inflammatory remarks about sensitive political issues that crossed the line from opinion into rhetoric that legal experts classified as dangerous incitement. The video, captured by dozens of fans on smartphones, went viral within hours, spawning a petition signed by over dismissed from the band, broke his silence with detailed accounts of psychological manipulation. It was never just about the music. Elson stated in his testimony, if you disagreed with Dave's worldview, you were treated as an enemy, even if you'd been by his side for decades. Another former guitarist described how Mustaine had allegedly sabotaged their career after leaving Mead, calling industry contacts to ensure they wouldn't be hired for other projects. The most damaging testimony came from former sound engineers and backstage staff who had witnessed Maine's behavior away from the public eye. They decribbed tirades against minorities, elaborate conspiracy theories shared as fact, and direct instructions to crew members to deny service to fans who belonged to certain groups or held opposing political views. As the allegations mounted, so did the criticism of his long history of controversial statements in interview, news, on social media, and from the stage. What we've learned about the responsibility of public figures and the impact of their rhetoric in the past decade has completely transformed how we approach freedom of expression, testified Dr. Marcus Bennett, a media ethics expert and key witness for the prosecution. The defense of "it's just my opinion" or "it's just rock and roll" no longer holds water when those opinions demonstrably cause harm or incite other to harmful action. Mr. Mustaine has over 2 million social Media followers and sells out arenas. Worldwide, that level of influence comes with responsibilities that the evidence shows he has repeatedly abused. Mustaine had responded to these criticisms by doubling down, insisting his critics were trying to censor him and violate his constitutional rights. He hired a team of high-profile attorneys and launched a public relations campaign, framing himself as a martyr for free speech. "They're coming after me because I refuse to be silenced," he told an interviewer shortly before the trial began. "Today it's me, tomorrow it could be any artist who doesn't conform to whatever the acceptable opinion is." This week, but as evidence mounted in public opinion shifted, his defense began to crumble. His refusal to moderate his public statements in the face of devolving social standards ultimately sealed his fate. The prosecution's case was strengthened by the testimony of several fans who claimed they had been radicalized by Maine's rhetoric, with one individual stating under oath that Mead lyrics and Mustaine's statements had directly influenced his decision to participate in a violent political demonstration that had resulted in multiple injuries. Though Maine's legal team argued this was an extreme case and not representative of the band typical fan, the testimony proved powerful in demonstrating the real-world impact of a public figure's words. As Mustaine left the courthouse through a side entrance to avoid the media frenzy, the music world was already assessing the impact of his downfall. Industry experts predicted the verdict would send shockwaves through the entertainment business, forcing artists to reconsider how they express controversial opinions. "This is unprecedented," said Billboard magazine's senior editor in a hastily published analysis. "We've seen careers end over controversy before, but rarely with this level of legal consequence. Every artist with a political opinion is going to be reviewing their social media right now." Record labels that had once tolerated or even encouraged provocative statements from their artists were already distancing themselves, emphasizing their commitment to responsible messaging. Universal Music Group Mead's distributor released a statement within hours of the verdict. "We believe in artistic freedom, but also in the responsibility that comes with a global platform. We are reviewing our artist conduct policies in light of today's verdict." His vast musical empire began to unravel almost immediately. Streaming services announced they would be flagging certain Megadeth songs with content warnings pending review for potentially harmful lyrics. Major retailers pulled Megadeth merchandise from shelves, and festival organizers around the world issued statements confirming the band had been removed from upcoming lineups. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which had been considering Mead for induction, quietly removed them from its most influential figures. The industry continues its shift toward holding artists accountable for the impact of their words and actions. What remains is a cautionary tale about the dangers of building an empire on a persona that cannot adapt to changing times. The man who once commanded millions with his blistering guitar solos and unfiltered opinions now faces a future without the career that defined him, forced to say goodbye to the world he once dominated. The question now becomes, in a world that has moved beyond Dave Maine's particular brand of provocation, what will be the lasting impact of his controversial legacy? While his approach may be relegated to history, the conversation his downfall has sparked about artistic expression and responsibility may ultimately prove to be his most important contribution to a music industry in the midst of painful but necessary evolution. What do you think was the verdict against Dave Mustaine justified? Or was he unfairly targeted? Has your appreciation of Megadeth's music been affected by his controversial statements? Let me know in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more thought-provoking content about the people and controversies that shape our world. More than share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to like, share and subscribe to Space Age Insights and click on the next video popping up on your screen.